To the traders passing into the Indian country, cattle were sold for beef. Sugar, tallow, potatoes, and other vegetables were traded. But the Green Bay settlement furnished no surplus of flour or corn. In my earliest recollection, there were white potatoes raised at the bay in large quantities, and the fields and gardens furnished peas, beans, pumpkins, melons, cucumbers, beets, carrots, turnips, rutabagas, onions, and lettuce in abundance. There was no buckwheat produced till quite recently. Of fruit trees, I remember in my earliest boyhood that Madame Amble Roy had the only apple tree in the settlement. It was a large bearing tree, a foot in diameter. Miss Roy was the sister of Charles de Longley. Currants were then plentiful. These currants and the apple tree were the only cultivated fruits until after 1816. Welcome. My name is Joel Barthel, and what you were just listening to was actually a recording of myself speaking in terms of Augustin Langlon, Auguste Grignon, who was a grandchild of Langlade, one of the original settlers in the Green Bay area. And I wanted to give you some perspective about how when we here at Seed Savers are exchanging our seeds and growing them, there is a rich history, there is a rich past. Here, Augustin Grignon was a person who settled and was born in Green Bay. Before him were thousands and thousands of Native Americans growing many of these same crops, but he also introduced, and as you heard, brought in crops that were new to the area. And the rich history and combination of the native corn, beans, peas, along with the European influence of the carrots and rutabagas and cucumbers all being blended together, there certainly is a rich history and opportunity when you look at what has been grown in the past. And that's what we at Seed Savers, of course, are all about, the history of these seeds and preserving them. Well, today I'm going to present to you a concept or an idea that hopefully will inspire and motivate you a little bit about what you can do as a person involved in seed saving. I call this cultivating relationships to regrow the past. And again, my name is Joel Barthel. I'll be your presenter today. Today we are going to do an introduction of my background, how I got involved in this. We'll talk about cultivating relationships and what you can do, and then some lessons learned that I've picked up along the way, and finally some takeaways that you could actually then follow through and do something similar to what I described yourself if you so choose. And there's a number of ways to get involved in different levels of involvement. So first off, a little bit about myself here, introduction-wise. There you can see I'm actually wearing some of my period clothing. Thought I'd make this a little bit more interesting for you guys here. In this picture also is my older brother on the top right there. He started growing seeds at a very early age, inspired by mostly my mother, as was myself. As we were growing seeds, my brother often would have us till the ground, work the soil, harvest, and such. And ultimately, he even became one of the managers at Seed Savers Exchange and of the Seed Savers headquarters, I should say, in Decorah, Iowa, until moving on from there to be a project manager at Mayo Clinic. So he was and has a passion for that and instilled that in me, just as my parents did to him and myself and their parents before them. So this spans generations, as you would expect. That's what seed saving is about, passing it on to the next generation. Pictured also here is myself working in a historical living history type of environment. I have a passion not just for living history and seeds, but the combination of the two, really, I guess. You could say that, especially when you look at the bottom left there, speaking of in terms of the rich culture of seeds and variety, one of those things that the Europeans encountered was these, what they called wild oats or crazy oats. And ultimately, that's the wild rice, which is a grass that you see me harvesting in modern day here, yet continuing on some of those same traditions and enjoying some of the benefits of that. So introduction wise, that's me. That's my brief background that I'm going to share here. We're going to really focus on, though, is cultivating relationships. I had the opportunity to work in historical settings and am still doing so for the last 2 decades. And the garden that you see in the background here is actually representing a garden for the Tonk Cottage, which is the oldest still standing structure that is known in Wisconsin. Some people date it as early as 1776. Very probable is a little bit after that date, but the important thing is the man who settled there, Joseph Roy, that's the one who I just read about in that account. Augustin Grignon was related to him and mentioned how Madame Roy, who had grown currants in her garden, that's the same thing you're going to find in this cottage garden outside of at a later time period, at least as well. So what I see here with cultivating relationships, it's mutualistic. Both parties who are involved in this do benefit and win. And really, there's four different wins. I'll just bring us to this real quick. There's a win because the park gets much needed volunteer work. And that goes without saying. Many of our museums and parks rely on largely not just donations, but even volunteers to put in their time and their effort. So if you take the time and effort to do that, of course, you are benefiting the park. It's a win for them. So don't be timid in reaching out and offering your services. More likely than not, they're going to appreciate it. Pictured here again is my older brother who's still involved in saving and working with seeds but on a personal level. Here, win-win, the second win that you consider here is you get land for your passion. Often these places, these open air museums, are isolated, ideal for seed saving. So pictured there, you can see one of my daughters carrying some tobacco leaves to be grown. Here is different varieties and strains of garlic that I've maintained over the years, and heirloom corn that we tend to grow, and it's on display there. Speaking of it being on display, that's another one of those win-win-win situations. You create, by working on these sites in the public eye, public awareness, support, and spread of seed saving. It's another win in this scenario. Here's shown an encampment. When people from the encampment are there, there's usually more visitors. It's a good time to do your planting, your harvesting. And sometimes the reenactors themselves will come in and be interested. On a few occasions, I've even shared seed through that method. And in many times, you talk to individuals as you're processing your plants, and they are surprised to find that there are different varieties of potatoes, different varieties of garlic, different varieties than what they are so used to seeing in the modern world. And often it opens their eyes. Many times I've shared that there is such a thing as a seed savers exchange. Another win in this scenario is personal growth. We all have those off seasons where you can do your research during the winter months or time where you're not growing, and you're going to be inspired by doing this to find appropriate seeds and locations for growing. So it's a win, 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 win scenario. Now, if you can cultivate a relationship, it's win, win, win. I've learned that there are many, many different places. We'll talk about that down in a moment here where you can go to do this. Um, Obviously, there's lessons to be learned having done it for 20 years. And what I'd like to do then is share some of those lessons with you. So you see that this really isn't something overly difficult. It's something that can benefit you and isn't overly hard to implement. There's just that barrier of saying, okay, I'm going to do this. So some lessons that I've learned along the way. First, you do need to be a starter. That you need to be the one that contacts the park and says, hey, I'm interested in volunteering. I'd like to, help with weeding. I'd help with planting. I'd help with harvest and come up with ideas. Do your research, then propose your ideas. These places that you will be going to, they are interested in history and sharing and educating history. Just as Seed Savers Exchange has a mission, they will have their own mission statements. Pictured here is when I first arrived at the park that I work at here. Um, Primarily, there is flooding going on in the garden, and I did a little bit of research, found out, okay, this is not the best place for this. There's some shade. We can find some higher ground. Also, the design of the fence, you'll notice, is a little bit different. That's a wattle fence, but it's oriented vertically. Worked really well. But in the process of looking at what other historical parks are doing and finding some paintings from the 15th century, I was able to figure out, okay, since we're reapproaching this, let's do it in the proper way that we know best to do to emulate what would be most likely in this situation. There are no portraits from the past. We have mostly sketches, paintings, descriptions. So, like that account from Augustine Grignon, who's describing what was grown, those are valuable resources. You do have to do some research and then propose what you'd like to do. So, be willing to do what's needed then. Sometimes that means you physically have to get involved. Sometimes it means you can give directions and clarity to those who are involved in doing the maintenance or curating of the open air museum. So, an example shown here, I took advantage of a few days, weekends really, where the park had volunteers come in and we cut down a bunch of willow. The willow was in a park in within the park itself, and I used my time to sort and get it ready so that we could prepare a new fence. Working with the park, we were able to obtain a grant for some materials, and you can see some cedar posts that were then used to purchase through that. Those cedar posts were then set. I didn't have to dig those holes. That's a lot of work. But I did say, hey, if the park can obtain some field stone for me to lay as a base and a foundation, I'd be willing to help set those in place. So it's a mutualistic. Both parties are getting something accomplished and done. Here you can see that garden then prepared and then the wattling that took place. It may look a little bit scary and intimidating, but again, you can do this over multiple days, even multiple seasons if that's what it takes. Part of the process of building it is also of an interest to the park and visitors coming through as well. That being said, doing what's needed, you will be able to reap the rewards. You've now established a good relationship and you've built a park garden that can be used historically for growing crops. Another lesson here is in your planning and research, you may find that there is no clear description. When they say furnished peas, beans, pumpkins, melons, you then have to decide, well, what do they mean when they say that they had carrots? What do they mean when they had lettuce? What varieties would be most likely? Oftentimes in your research, you won't find an exact description. So proxies or best fits are often needed. And in many of those cases, finding an heirloom is better than what the modern variety is going to be. Example here, I'm growing, tried several varieties of corn of Native American variety. So the Indian corns that I find are much, much more appropriate than a modern sweet corn. And I'm able to share that with guests as they come through and say, hey, look, even today we don't grow a lot of sweet corn. It's mostly going to be ground to flour or sold off for a cattle feed. Similar idea here when you look at watermelons, a red watermelon, seedless watermelon is something that might be brought in, by a reenactor, but that doesn't show the full picture as well as if you have the opportunity to grow some watermelon and it actually is a heirloom variety. This is a petite yellow. I've also grown stars and stripes watermelons and other ones. And usually those have more seeds. And most of us know a little bit more flavor than the ones that are grown to be seedless. So it's worth your time and effort to make sure you do the research and find the best fits that you can for your seeds. Do prepare for pests, whether they're rabbits, potato beetles, raccoons, squirrels, deer. There are ways of getting around that. Usually, if you have a fence that is built out of materials that would be historically accurate, it's going to have holes. Unfortunately, this site that you find is not going to be smiling upon the idea of using chicken wire to block off pests. So you're going to have to come up with some alternatives. You can work around those. Quick example is you notice that I laid fieldstone as the base. That not only matched what I saw in the 15th century painting or picture, but it prevents animals from digging underneath. And truth be told, they would have done the same, not for critters digging in necessarily, which rabbits and such will do, but more so to even keep their own livestock out. You'll notice that Augustine describes to the traders passing into the Indian country, cattle were sold for beef. He describes how these cattle and also pigs and other animals were raised, but they were grazing freely. They were basically free range. And instead of fencing in the animals, it was more you fence in those plots of land that you don't want those animals digging through. A little bit of this spray that is a natural heirloom spray works. So the like clove oil or putrescent eggs, ones that will work that aren't pesticide based, you don't have to worry about that. So finding some spray and putting it around your perimeter, you don't necessarily have to spray it directly on your crops. Similar idea that if you find that you're getting potato beetles, well, fine. Historically, what would they have done? If they had a pest infestation, mechanically taking them out. In the case of the modern Colorado potato beetle, you can remove it pretty easily mechanically while it's in the larva stage. You brush it, it will fall right off. Do that once, maybe twice, and you no longer have to do it again. A little bit of work that you can build into your interpretation and revealing the past and how this was done, you end up with a much cleaner crop rather than spraying it with any pesticide. You now have basically what they would have had an organic crop. Similar thing if you find pests eating your corn, there are deterrents and sprays that have like capsaicin or cinnamon oil that will taste bad to the creature, but not be a unnatural synthetic pesticide that would harm you if you were to eat it. Particularly as you get towards the end of the season, when you see deer, that's when you're going to want to say, okay, they're going to jump in because they know the corn is ripe, or raccoons. So towards the end of the season, you watch and you monitor. You see when there's a need, and then you apply when it's necessary. Speaking of deer, you'll notice those can be stopped real cleverly, a method that isn't too far-fetched for historical accuracy. Here you can see that same Tunk cottage garden, and there's a string in the background. That string in the background or wire has some fabric tied to it. That can be enough. That fabric, bright fabric tied off on the ropes there, to the deer, that's intimidating. They don't want to jump in and get all messed up in that. A similar thing is done in the other garden where we ran some poles at a higher height, and it actually does the job pretty good. Even when there's deer immediately in the park, that tends to scare them off. Finally, another little note here is, since you're building a garden where people are educating others and sharing, map it out. Create a map, have that available to share with other interpreters, park directors, visitors, so that you can explain. And you'll accumulate or be motivated to accumulate more of the history of some of these crops that you might be growing from year to year. And then last advice here, lessons learned, is go beyond. Prepare education materials and usable resources. Example pictured here, I've got some of the corn that was grown, and I've taken it, nixtamatized it, put it to the next stage. That's something that was learned by what the Indians did. By mixing it with ash and freeing up some of the niacin, it became not only more tasty, but also more healthy to eat. And the European people eventually picked up on this and said, oh, wow, we can actually find that it's something in the corn that we're adding back that is healthy. So add that to your interpretation. Go above and beyond, share things about the park. Find historic recipes. That way, the food that you grow in the garden can actually be used by you or people that work at the park so that they can demonstrate it. Going above and beyond might even mean getting dressed up. Offer, you'd be surprised. Many of these museums and historical parks, if you express an interest in doing living history, they will be glad to provide you with clothing or help you to get a proper set of clothing so that you can work under the right conditions and not only show the crops that are being grown and its history, but represent it in a way that is educational and living history. And finally, demonstrate the process of historic foods where you're processing them and going through the seed saving. It's helpful when you find an event when there's more public going through. That's a good time to separate out your seeds, and after they've dried out, have the opportunity to talk about that they didn't just store these for eating, but they stored them for planting for the next year as well. So those are the lessons learned. Finally, I'd like to share today some takeaways. There are many open air history and living parks listed by state, which you can visit and you can make a connection with. The list I'm going to share is not exhaustive, it's not complete. Look around, local is better. Okay. So, some takeaways. What I recommend you do is simply Google these words: list of open air and living history museums. If you look at list of open air and living history museums, you will see hundreds of possibilities listed by state. When you first do that, the ones that will show up will be the farm museums, but go ahead and scroll down. You'll see military forts and posts. Go ahead and click on that. When you click on the military forts and posts, so I'll pull this up for us here. So there's this extensive list by state. The military forts and posts is actually more extensive. And again, you go to any one of these, and there's a high probability that if there is any history going on there or in that area, somebody is going to have a garden nearby. Okay. In addition to that, there are open air and living history museums. That's the one that I actually work at, an open air and living history museum. So take a look, scroll down that list beyond the farm museums, military forts, and find those museums that are near you and local. Lots of opportunities. Look beyond just Wikipedia as well. A quick search online or a quick search for living history, open air museums, and you should find a lot of opportunities. So now the steps that you can do. So here's the real takeaway. Research and plan. You're going to need to research and plan, create a vision. That's why I said I looked up and found this account from this grandson of the first settler. Easily find many other descriptions about the crops grown, even if you don't have pictures. A description is worth something there. Contact the director, that museum director, park worker. Share with them that you wish to cultivate a relationship. Again, it's a win, 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 win situation. Arrange an on site visit. Don't limit yourself to contacting over the phone or email. Visiting in person allows you to see what opportunities there are, what land space might be available. Start simple. You don't have to build a new garden. You could use an existing garden, or you could offer just to help out. It might just be 1 hour a week. Start simple, build that relationship. It's that relationship that allows you to take the next step and propose ideas, make suggestions for seeds that can be grown. Go beyond. You can strengthen that relationship by being there to help turn the soil, plant, weed, control pests, harvest, process seeds. Go beyond. What I'm saying here is if you put that effort in and you cultivate that relationship, it will grow. You will make a connection with the past. And I assure you, if you get involved in this, you will enjoy it as well. It's a win-win situation. Remember, their mission statement is really close to what Seed Saver's mission statement is. It is a mutualistic relationship that you're looking to develop here. All right, I've shared a lot of information with you guys here. If you ask, the slides for this presentation are available, so you can get these same steps and same lessons learned broken down here. You can get that link as well on the document. Reach out to me if you'd like. I'd be happy to share. I'm always willing to learn. It's worth learning something new every day, and I'm always willing to help others to learn. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the Seed Savers Exchange virtual conferences.